I'm Christine Wolf. I'm a former preschool teacher, and then I became a freelance writer about 8-9 years ago. And I used to have a weekly opinion column in a Chicago newspaper. And I've written a few semi-memorable pieces, none of which you've ever read. But for the most part, I'm still just a rookie trying to figure it all out. But one column in particular that I wrote, I submitted it to my editor, and then I quickly received a rejection from him. And he said that the issue that I'd written about was way too weighty, not right for the paper, and that my piece just read more like a journal entry and not like an opinion column, which I still don't understand, because to me it's my opinion, so my journal entries are my opinions, but the topic just didn't work. And while he was probably right, I resented the guy. I couldn't get past kind of how important this topic was, and that the message needed to be shared. And so resentful was I about his killing my piece that I kind of never got over that. And this is about 1.5 years ago. And I really never was able to write another column after that for him. And I've written blog posts and things, but I ended up, my column just disappeared. I lost my mojo. So I rewrote the column for you all, and it's still from my heart, and it's still raw, and it's still unfinished. And it's still just as important as it was to me then, now as it was then, and it's still something that I believe in after all this time. My next door neighbor killed himself on a snowy Sunday. It was March 28th, 2015. I've been given permission by his family to tell this story. They're passionate advocates for mental health awareness and did not hesitate to let me say his name. His name is Jim Caldwell, and at the time of his suicide, he was 46 years old. On the morning that he takes his life, before I even know what's happened, I see an ambulance and a police car outside of our home. Emergency personnel ascend my neighbor's porch with determination and a defibrillator, and then they emerge defeated, with their eyes cast downward. Peering through my window, I see all of my neighbors standing, sentinels, just like me, watching and wondering and waiting for the news. What happened? What is taking so long? What can we be doing right now? And at one point, I run outside in my bare feet, in my pajamas, and I ask an officer if everything's all right and what's happening. Of course I know things aren't right. And of course I know he's not going to tell me, but I still have to do it. I still have to ask. And the officer looks at me and he says, "Will you be home later? We may need to stop by and talk to you." And I say, "Sure, we're here. We're right next door." And he never appears. And we never see the officer again. A short while later, when a black coroner's van arrives, I can't drag myself away from my bedroom window. I need to know what happened. Is it one of the teenagers next door? Is it one of the parents? So time feels as frozen as the March earth outside, and I wait for anybody to emerge from their house. The coroner's van gets redirected to an alley, and the uniformed men enter the rear of the house, and I know this because my lookout post has moved from the front of the house to the back. I try not to be obvious as I'm staring out the window. I'm fearful that the neighbors will come out and think that I'm spying on them and their private business, which I'm clearly doing. But I think my neighbors, my God, somebody has died. One of them is dead. And I can't stop the questions in my mind. Who is it? How did something happen? Why did it happen? When did it happen? Where did it happen? What should I be doing? And I finally pull myself away from the window and I end up making breakfast for my 3 kids. I think I can't stand here forever. This is ridiculous. This is shameful for me to stand here and just peer out. So later I hear the neighborhood chatter, and it's spread with love and concern and not a small bit of curiosity, and everybody's saying, "Did you hear it was Jim? He killed himself. How did he do it? Did anybody see this coming? You know, he hasn't been well. Did you notice? He seemed fine to me. This is such a shame. He's the nicest guy imaginable. You just never know. How is everybody doing?" And all of this chatter is happening, but not with the family. Everybody's staying away from their house and giving them space. So the questions and the comments just felt so pointless and shallow to me, as I'm sure they felt to everybody who was asking them. We just all felt so helpless. I mean, what could we say? What does anybody say? This is a man that I'd lived next door to for 15 years, and we live in an old Victorian row house, and so Jim and I shared a common wall. Each year at Christmas time, I could smell the bread that Jim would bake in the hours before he'd drop it off at our house. It would still be warm and wrapped in tin foil, and when he'd drop it off, there wouldn't be a note, and there was no awkward pleasantry. It was just a neighborly gesture to wish our family goodwill at the holidays. And I realized I never baked him anything. And I regret that I knew him less deeply than I could have, because we shared 15 years of block parties and power outages and fallen tree limbs and kids' graduations and election cycles, and we loaned jumper cables and spare keys, and we'd celebrated school acceptance letters and musical performances at the high school for the kids, and we exchanged the wave that neighbors exchange as you're coming and you're going. And I wondered, why didn't I wave more, or why didn't I stop more often? And I wondered, what did I miss, and why didn't I notice? And the American Foundation for the Prevention of Suicide states that the vast majority of people contemplating suicide don't really want. And I remember him saying very little during that shoveling, except one thing. In response to my comment, he looked at me and he said, "At least the snow is light tonight." And he was right. And then he asked me how my daughter was liking her new school. But that's the last thing he said to me. And I noticed that his speech was somewhat slowed, and still I told myself not to pry. I thought to myself, that's not polite, don't point that out. That's private, don't presume that he wants to talk about something like that. Just let it be. And looking back, I wish that I'd taken the risk and asked him, "Are you okay? Or you don't seem like yourself, is everything all right?" Why did I hide the concern that I felt? Why did I think that it was simpler to put my shovel away and avoid a potentially awkward conversation? So a few months after Jim's death, a line from a song that I'd heard hundreds of times before brought me to this shocking and unexpected jag of tears while I was driving. And it's this line that repeated 7 times throughout the song, and the line that grabbed my heart was, "I just want you to know who I am." And the song, called Iris, was featured in a 1998 movie about a deeply feeling yet invisible angel walking among mortals. And throughout my 15 years as Jim's neighbor, a scrawny little peony bush next to his front steps had often been fodder for springtime speculation among our neighbors. Because some years it would blossom and other years nothing. And that spring of Jim's suicide, the bush barely sprouted. And then the next year, I stood before the blossoms on the cement that we'd together cleared of snow. And the vibrant and open petals drew me in. And in this moment, those beautiful petals, still kind of cast in the shadows of the morning, they yearned, I could see them, they yearned for the afternoon sun just to embrace them with warmth. And so for anyone and everyone who might be standing in the shadows right now, this is for you. Because your story and your pain may be silent, but who are we to judge? Your story matters more than you can possibly imagine. And for the rest of us, may we take more notice of the pain below the beauty of all of that suffering. And may we hesitate less to inquire and to embrace others when the shadows engulf their hearts. I never learned what happened to Jim. I never learned why or when or how or where, and that's okay. Because who am I to judge the actions or inactions of others? I can only look deep into my own heart and ask if I've done everything that I could. Thank you.